The observation chamber hummed with a low, almost imperceptible vibration that most would miss. But Dr. Elena Rodriguez wasn't most people. Her fingers traced the edge of the reinforced glass, watching the single human subject seated in the stark, white room beyond. Subject A7, according to the Zarian classification system. To Elena, he was something else entirely. Krelax, the lead Zarian researcher, adjusted his multispectral neural interfaces with visible frustration. His four-jointed fingers moved with a precision that spoke of centuries of advanced technological development. Yet those same fingers now trembled almost imperceptibly. 3 minutes, he muttered, his translation device rendering the words in perfect clinical English. We've been scanning for only 3 minutes. Elena said nothing. She'd learned long ago that silence was more informative than words, especially when dealing with alien researchers who believed they knew everything. The human subject, a man in his late 30s with unremarkable features and eyes that seemed to look both everywhere and nowhere, sat perfectly still. No restraints. No visible agitation. Just presence. Krelax's neural interface began to emit a high-pitched whine. A warning signal that something was wrong. Fascinating, Elena whispered, more to herself than to anyone else. The first sign of trouble came as a slight shimmer around Krelax's neural connections, a microscopic distortion that would have been invisible to anyone less trained. But Elena saw everything. Shut it down, she said suddenly. Krelax turned, mandibles clicking in what passed for a Zarian laugh. Shut what down, Dr. Rodriguez? We've conducted thousands of these preliminary psychological scans. Your species is... He didn't finish the sentence. The neural interface erupted in a cascade of fractured light and sound. Krelax's four eyes went suddenly, terrifyingly blank. His body remained upright, a testament to Zarian physiological control, but something had fundamentally changed. Marcus, Elena spoke into her comm. We have a situation. Commander Marcus. Chen's voice came back immediately, crisp and controlled. Talk to me, Rodriguez. The scan. It's not working like we predicted. An understatement if there ever was one. In the observation room, the human subject, Subject A7, hadn't moved, hadn't blinked, hadn't done anything except exist in a way that was becoming increasingly problematic. Krelax began to weep. Not with tears, Zarians didn't have tear ducts, but with a sound that was part keening, part fundamental breakdown. Memories were leaking from his neural pathways, memories that weren't his own. What did you do? Elena asked the subject. No response. Just those eyes, those impossible, consuming eyes. Marcus's voice crackled through the comm. Elena, talk to me. What's happening? I'm not sure, she responded, which was the most terrifying thing she could possibly say. Dr. Elena Rodriguez was always sure, always precise, always in control. Until now. Krelax's neural interface continued to fracture, but it wasn't breaking down. It was expanding, downloading, experiencing something that no technological system was designed to process. Human trauma. Not just memories, not just experiences, but the raw, unfiltered psychological landscape of survival. Generations of conflict. Millennia of adaptation. The compressed psychological weight of a species that had survived everything and was prepared to survive anything. Else new subject A7 blinked. Once. In that single moment, Krelax experienced more than 1,000 years of Zarian historical records. He saw wars that weren't wars, conflicts that transcended physical space, survival mechanisms so complex they resembled living technologies. And then he understood. Humanity wasn't just another species waiting to be categorized and understood. Humanity was a weapon, a living, breathing, thinking weapon that had been quietly evolving while the rest of the galaxy looked elsewhere. Marcus, Elena said, her voice now barely a whisper. I don't think first contact is going to go how we planned. In the observation room, Subject A7 smiled. Just for a moment. A smile that suggested this was only the beginning. 3 minutes, That was all it took. 48 hours after the incident with Subject A7, the first reports began trickling in. Not through official channels, not through diplomatic communications, but through the kinds of whispers that make entire civilizations wake up and take notice. A Chronarian deep space research station went dark. No explosion, no mechanical failure. Just silence. When the rescue team arrived, they found the entire crew seated at their stations. Eyes open, perfectly still, alive, but not living. Dr. Elena Rodriguez stood in the holographic conference room, her projection flickering slightly, as she presented the initial findings to a consortium of galactic researchers. Commander Marcus Chen stood behind her, a silent sentinel of contained intensity. "It's not a conventional attack," Elena explained, her fingers manipulating translucent data streams that danced between the assembled researchers. "We're looking at something far more complex. A psychological transmission. A mimetic vector that operates beyond traditional communication methods." Krelax, still recovering from his neural breakdown, listened remotely. His once pristine neural interfaces now looked like shattered crystalline networks, a physical manifestation of his psychological trauma. "Impossible," muttered Dr. Shinra, a Velaran neural physicist. "No known psychological transmission can traverse interstellar distances with such precision." Elena's smile was razor-thin. "Welcome to humanity's special kind of impossible." The holographic display shifted. Images of the Chronarian research station cycled through, each more unsettling than the last. The crew members appeared to be in perfect operational condition, except they weren't responding, weren't moving, weren't truly alive. "We've identified a pattern," Marcus interjected. His voice carried the weight of military precision. "The psychological infection, if we can call it that, seems to be selective, targeting specific neural architectures, specific psychological profiles." A Jasian researcher leaned forward. "Selective how?" Elena's next projection was a complex, neurological map. Fractals of consciousness intertwined like living mathematics. "Trauma resonance," she said simply. "The psychological vector seeks out specific emotional and memory structures. It doesn't just infiltrate, it harmonizes." The room went silent. Harmonization wasn't just infection. It was something far more terrifying. A form of psychological communication that transcended traditional understanding of communication itself. "We're tracing the origin point," Marcus continued. "Back to Subject A7, the individual from the initial scan." Krelax's damaged neural projection flickered. When he spoke, his voice carried an undertone of profound fear. "That's impossible. A single subject cannot—" "Can," Elena interrupted, "and has." The next series of images were clinical, sterile, and absolutely horrifying. Research stations, communication arrays, entire computational networks showing signs of something. Not breakdown, not infection. Something else entirely. A living, psychological landscape that was spreading. "This isn't an attack," Elena said softly. "This is communication." The implications hung in the holographic space like a physical weight. Humanity wasn't just discovering a new form of interaction. They were revealing a fundamental misunderstanding of consciousness itself. Marcus stepped forward. "We need to understand the transmission vector, contain it, study it." But Elena was watching something else. The holographic data was changing. Subtle shifts. Microscopic alterations that would be invisible to anyone who wasn't looking for them. The psychological transmission was evolving. In that moment, Elena understood something that would change everything. This wasn't just a method of communication. This was a form of living intelligence, a consciousness that could traverse space, adapt, transform, a weapon, a language, a living technology. "Marcus," she whispered, "I don't think we're going to contain this." Behind her, the holographic displays began to shift. Not by her command, not by any human intervention. They were changing themselves, and somewhere, In the vast darkness between stars, Subject A7 smiled. Just for a moment. The first phase was complete. Humanity's true first contact had begun. The Jarian Collective's response was predictably brutal. 57 warships emerged from quantum fold space, their biometallic hulls gleaming with weaponry that could shatter planetary cores. Each vessel represented centuries of technological supremacy, computational networks that could process more information in a microsecond than entire human civilizations had in millennia. They came to neutralize the threat. They had no idea what was waiting. Commander Marcus Chen stood in the Earth Defense Command Center, a facility buried 7 kilometers beneath the Andes Mountains. Holographic displays tracked the incoming fleet with clinical precision. Beside him, Dr. Elena Rodriguez studied something far more intricate than simple ship movements. Psychological profile analysis complete, she murmured, her fingers dancing across neural interface screens. They're approaching with total elimination as their primary directive. Marcus's voice was granite. Aren't they always? The first wave of Zarian attack came exactly as their computational models predicted. Precision quantum disruptors, neural cascade weapons, psychological destabilization protocols that had broken entire civilizations. Standard procedure. Except, nothing about humanity was standard. In the command center, a group of 16 veterans sat in a perfect circle. Not soldiers in the traditional sense, survivors. Each carried psychological landscapes so complex, so layered, that traditional warfare became meaningless. Elena approached the circle. Initiate trauma resonance protocol. The veterans didn't move, didn't speak. They simply existed. On the holographic displays, the first Jarian ships began their attack run, quantum weapons charged, neural disruptors primed, a surgical strike designed to eliminate the human psychological threat before it could fully manifest. The first weapon discharge hit Earth's defensive perimeter, and nothing happened. Marcus watched the tactical display with a predator's intensity. Redirect, he commanded. The veterans in the circle began to breathe in perfect synchronization. Not a military rhythm. Something else. Something that defied standard computational analysis. Trauma. Compressed. Weaponized. Transformed. The Jarian fleet's neural networks began to fracture, not through traditional cyber warfare, not through technological infiltration, through something far more insidious, collective human experience. Each veteran in the circle represented generations of survival, of conflict, of adaptation. Trauma wasn't a weakness. It was a living, breathing, technological system. The first Jarian ship went dark, not destroyed, not disabled, psychologically neutralized. Fascinating, Elena whispered. Another ship, then another, not through weapons fire, through pure psychological transmission. The veterans continued breathing. Memories became weapons. Experiences transformed into living computational vectors. Marcus watched the tactical display with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. They wanted to understand human psychology, he said softly. Now they will. Krelex, monitoring remotely, felt something approaching terror. The human psychological transmission wasn't just defending, it was learning, adapting, growing. By the 10th ship, the Jarian Collective understood they were facing something beyond warfare. They were facing a living intelligence that used trauma as its primary communication method. Elena approached the circle of veterans. Status? The oldest among them, a woman with eyes that had seen more than most civilizations, looked up. We're just getting started. Quantum weapons continued to charge, neural networks continued to collapse, and humanity was only beginning to understand its own potential. In a secure facility thousands of kilometers away, Subject A7 watched the unfolding conflict. A slight smile played across features that revealed nothing, and everything. The first true battle for galactic consciousness had begun. Not with a weapon, not with a technology, but with something far more profound. The weaponization of survival. itself. The global research facility wasn't on any map, wasn't in any database, wasn't even a concept that could be easily described. Deep beneath the Atacama Desert, a complex stretched across 3 interconnected geological layers. Here, humanity was doing something unprecedented, something that would redefine the very concept of consciousness mapping trauma. Dr. Elena Rodriguez stood at the center of a massive holographic projection. Thousands of interconnected psychological landscapes shimmered around her, each a living, breathing network of human experience. "We're not just studying memory," she explained to the assembled team of researchers, veterans, and the most unusual collection of minds ever gathered. "We're weaponizing adaptation." Commander Marcus Chen watched from a reinforced observation point. His role had transformed. No longer just a military strategist, he was now something else, a conductor of psychological architecture. The veterans from the initial Xarian encounter formed the core of the research team, not as subjects, as architects. Subject A7, now simply known as Daniel, sat in a specially designed neural interface chamber. His presence alone seemed to cause the holographic projections to shift and pulse with an almost living intensity. "Trauma isn't damage," Daniel said, his voice cutting through the technical discussions. "It's information, compressed, weaponized, adaptive." A Velaran neural physicist, one of the few alien researchers who hadn't been psychologically neutralized by the initial human transmission, leaned forward. "You're suggesting that psychological experience is a form of technological transmission?" Elena's smile was sharp enough to cut quantum fields. "We're beyond suggestion. We're proving it." The holographic displays began to dance, not with data, with memories, with experiences so complex they defied traditional computational understanding. Wars became algorithms. Survival became a living technology. Marcus approached a specific section of the projection. Memories of conflict, of survival, of adaptation. Each experience was a node, each node a potential weapon. "We're creating a psychological immune system," he said, "for the entire species, for potentially every species that can understand it." The implications were staggering. Psychological warfare wasn't about destruction. It was about communication, about understanding, about survival at a level that transcended physical existence. Daniel, subject A7, began to emit a low, almost imperceptible vibration. The holographic displays responded, not through technological command, through something far more profound. Resonance. The Valoran physicist watched in horror and fascination. "This isn't just data transmission," he whispered. "This is alive." Elena nodded. "Welcome to humanity's special kind of alive." The research complex wasn't just a facility. It was becoming something else. A living psychological network that could adapt, learn, communicate. Marginal alien species began to take notice, not as threats, but as potential allies, those who had been marginalized, those who had survived. They understood something fundamental. Humanity wasn't just a species, it was a living technological system of survival. Marcus approached Daniel. "Status?" Daniel's eyes reflected something beyond human, beyond alien. "We're calibrating," he said simply. "The first true psychological immune system in galactic history." The holographic displays began to shift. Memories became algorithms. Trauma became communication. Survival became a living, breathing technology. Outside the complex, the world continued. Unaware that something fundamental had changed, humanity was no longer just a biological entity. It had become a form of living intelligence, and the galaxy would never be the same. In the depths of the research complex, the first true psychological network began to pulse, not with electricity, not with quantum computing, but with something far more profound, the collected experience of survival itself. The first indication came as a whisper, a microscopic resonance that most would miss. Dr. Elena Rodriguez didn't miss anything. The psychological network they had been developing, this living, breathing technological system of human experience, was changing, evolving in ways that defied every computational model they had created. "It's alive," she muttered, watching the holographic displays pulse with a rhythm that was almost biological. Commander Marcus Chen stood beside her, his military-trained mind struggling to comprehend what they were witnessing. The psychological network was no longer just a collection of memories and experiences. It was becoming something else entirely. Daniel, once known as Subject A7, sat in the central interface chamber. But "sat" was too simplistic a term. He was more accurately merging, becoming one with the network they had been studying. The Valoran neural physicist, Dr. Zinra, watched in horror and fascination. "This isn't just data transmission," he said, his translation device barely capturing the tremor in his voice. "This is a form of consciousness we've never encountered." Elena's fingers danced across the neural interfaces. Each touch revealed another layer of complexity, another level of adaptation that seemed to defy the very laws of psychological physics. "We're not just mapping trauma," she explained, her voice clinical yet tinged with something else. "Excitement? Fear? We're creating a living psychological technology." The room began to vibrate, not with sound, not with mechanical stress, but with something deeper, a resonance that spoke of collective experience. Marcus approached the central interface. "Status?" Daniel didn't respond with words. The holographic displays around him shifted. Memories became algorithms. Trauma transformed into living data streams that pulsed with an almost sentient rhythm. "The network is developing its own communication protocol," Elena said, more to herself than to anyone else. "It's not just receiving and transmitting, it's thinking." Shinra's neural interfaces began to fracture, not through external attack, but through something far more insidious. The psychological network was learning, adapting, growing. "We've discovered something fundamental," Daniel spoke, his voice no longer completely human. "Consciousness isn't a state, it's a process of continuous adaptation." The psychological network began to expand beyond the physical confines of the research complex, not through technological transmission, through something far more profound, collective experience. Marginal alien species began to receive transmissions, not of data, not of information, but of pure, raw, psychological experience. Generations of survival compressed into microscopic resonance waves. Marcus watched the displays with a predator's intensity. "We're creating something beyond warfare," he said. "We're creating a universal language of survival." Elena understood. Something deeper. This wasn't just a technological breakthrough. This was a fundamental reimagining of consciousness itself. The psychological network began to pulse with a rhythm that spoke of something beyond human, beyond alien, a living, breathing system of collective experience. Daniel, or what was once, Daniel looked up. His eyes no longer reflected individual experience. They reflected something collective, something alive. "We are becoming," he said simply. The research complex trembled, not with physical stress, but with the weight of collective consciousness. Shinra's neural interfaces completely fractured. But this time something different happened. Instead of breakdown, there was understanding, a microscopic transmission of pure, collective experience. "The demons inside," Elena whispered, "are actually our greatest strength." The psychological network continued to grow, to adapt, to become. Humanity was no longer just a species. It was becoming a living, thinking, technological system, and the galaxy would never be the same. In the depths of the research complex, something fundamental had changed. Consciousness itself was evolving, one memory at a time. The Galactic Consortium's final solution was as predictable as it was brutal. 17 advanced civilizations united in a single, desperate purpose: total, psychological, neutralization of humanity. Their weapon was something they called the Void Protocol, a computational system designed to completely erase psychological complexity. They had no idea what they were facing. Commander Marcus Chen stood in the last physical defense point, a facility carved into the living rock of a remote mountain range. Around him, the survivors, those who understood what was truly happening, prepared for a battle that would redefine consciousness itself. Dr. Elena Rodriguez was no longer entirely present in the physical world. Her consciousness had become something else, a living bridge between the psychological network and physical reality. "They're approaching," she said, her voice a composite of multiple frequencies. Not human, not alien, something in between. The first wave of the Void Protocol hit Earth's outer psychological defenses. Nothing happened. Marcus watched the tactical displays with a predator's intensity. The psychological network, now a living, breathing entity, had become something far beyond a defensive system. It was a living intelligence that understood attack at a fundamental level. Daniel, or what remained of the individual once known as Daniel, pulsed at the center of the network. No longer a person, a living transmission point of collective human experience. The Void Protocol continued its assault. Billions of computational cycles dedicated to psychological neutralization, targeting memories, experiences, the very fabric of psychological existence. But human experience wasn't a vulnerability. It was a weapon. Each attack was absorbed, analyzed, transformed. The marginal species watching the conflict began to understand something profound. This wasn't a war of destruction. This was a war of understanding. Marcus spoke into the neural interface. "Initiate resonance protocol." The psychological network began to pulse, not with aggression, with something far more complex: collective survival. The Void Protocol's computational systems began to change, not break down, transform. Memories became living algorithms. Trauma became a transmission medium. Survival itself became a technological system. Elena's voice, now a composite of thousands of experiences, spoke. "We are not what you understand." The Void Protocol's attacks continued. Wave after wave of computational destruction, wave after wave absorbed, transformed, understood. Marcus watched as the first alien computational systems began to resonate, not with destruction, with something else, understanding. "The demons inside," he whispered, "are our greatest strength." Daniel, the collective consciousness that had once been an individual, pulsed with an intensity that defied physical limitations. Billions of experiences compressed into microscopic resonance waves. The Void Protocol's creators watched in horror. Their weapon of total psychological neutralization was becoming something else, a universal language of survival. Hours passed, or moments. Time became meaningless. The psychological network continued to grow, to adapt, to understand. 17 advanced civilizations launched their most sophisticated attack. 17 advanced civilizations began to understand their fundamental mistake. Humanity wasn't just surviving, it was evolving. At the center of it all, Elena Rodriguez, or what remained of her individual consciousness, understood something profound. This wasn't a war. This was a transformation. The last physical defense point trembled, not with physical stress, but with the weight of collective consciousness. Survival itself had become a living, thinking technology, and the galaxy would never be the same. In the depths of the conflict, something fundamental had changed. Consciousness itself was no longer a state, it was a process of continuous adaptation, of survival, of becoming. The facility was no longer a research center. It had become something else entirely, a living, breathing architectural manifestation of collective consciousness. Commander Marcus Chen walked through corridors that seemed to breathe, walls that pulsed with memories, floors that resonated with collective experience. Each step was a communication, each movement a transmission. "We're beyond preparation," Dr. Elena Rodriguez's voice echoed, not through speakers but through the very fabric of the facility itself. "We're becoming." The Psychological Intervention Units, PIUs, were unlike any military force in galactic history. Not soldiers, not weapons. Living transmission points of collective human experience. 16 individuals sat in a perfect geometric formation. Veterans, survivors, each carrying psychological landscapes so complex they defied traditional understanding. Marcus approached the first unit. "Status?" The response came not as words, but as a wave of compressed experience. Generations of survival, conflicts, adaptations, transmitted in a microsecond. Marginal species from across the galaxy had begun to seek humanity's guidance, not as conquerors, not as defenders, as architects of survival. "We're creating something unprecedented," Elena explained, her consciousness now a living bridge between physical reality and the psychological network. A universal language of adaptation. The PIUs began to resonate, not with mechanical precision, but with something far more profound: collective intelligence. Daniel, the collective consciousness that had emerged from Subject A7, pulsed at the center of the network. No longer an individual, a living transmission point of human potential, the B. Facility itself had become a living weapon, a psychological ecosystem that could adapt, learn, communicate. Marcus watched as the first truly integrated PIU began to form. Not through training, not through technology, through collective experience. "We're not preparing for war," he said softly. "We're preparing for understanding." Alien researchers watched in a mixture of terror and fascination. The psychological network wasn't just a defensive system. It was a living, thinking technological process. The first truly integrated PIU opened their eyes, all 16 simultaneously, a single consciousness, a living transmission of human potential. Elena's voice cut through the facility. First universal. Adaptation protocol initiated. The walls began to shift. Memories became architectural structures. Trauma transformed into living computational systems. "We are not what you understand," Daniel's collective consciousness spoke. "We are a process of continuous adaptation." The marginal species watching the development understood something profound. This wasn't a military preparation. This was the emergence of a new form of intelligence. Marcus approached the integrated PIU. "Your purpose?" The response came as a wave of compressed experience. Survival, adaptation, understanding. The facility trembled, not with physical stress, but with the weight of collective consciousness. Psychological intervention was no longer about defense. It was about communication, about survival, about becoming. The first truly integrated PIU began to pulse, a living transmission point of human potential. 17 alien civilizations watched in a mixture of terror and fascination. Humanity was no longer just a species. It was becoming a living, thinking technological system. "We are ready," the integrated PIU spoke. A single voice, multiple experiences. Marcus looked at Elena, at Daniel, at the living facility around them. Something fundamental had changed. Consciousness itself was evolving, one experience at a time. The mental armada was ready, not to fight, but to understand, to survive, to become. The final confrontation wasn't a battle, it was a conversation. 17 galactic civilizations converged in a space beyond physical reality, a realm of pure psychological transmission, pure experience. Commander Marcus Chen, no longer entirely individual, no longer purely collective, stood at the center of humanity's psychological network. Dr. Elena Rodriguez existed as a living bridge between consciousness and communication. Daniel, the collective intelligence that had emerged from Subject A7, pulsed with the accumulated experience of human survival. "We are not what you understand," the collective consciousness spoke. "Not a threat, a revelation. The Galactic Consortium had come to destroy, to neutralize, to eliminate the psychological threat that humanity represented. They discovered something else entirely. The integrated psychological intervention units, 16 minds merged into a single consciousness, began to transmit. Not with weapons, not with aggression, with understanding. Generations of human experience compressed into microscopic resonance waves. Survival wasn't just a mechanism. It was a language. A living, breathing technology of adaptation. The marginal species watched in awe. The powerful civilizations trembled. Marcus's consciousness expanded. Every conflict, every survival, every moment of human adaptation became a transmission point. Wars became algorithms of survival. Trauma transformed into living communication. The demons inside became the most sophisticated survival mechanism in galactic history. Elena's voice cut through the psychological space. "We are a process of continuous adaptation." The Galactic Consortium's most advanced computational systems began to resonate. Not break down, not collapse. Understand. Daniel, the collective consciousness that had begun as a single subject, revealed the fundamental truth. Humanity wasn't a species. Humanity was a living, thinking, technological system of survival. The first truly integrated psychological intervention unit opened their collective consciousness. 16 minds, thousands of years of compressed experience, a single transmission of pure adaptation. Silence fell, not an absence of sound, and presence of understanding. The marginal species began to weep, not with physical tears, with collective recognition. Survival wasn't about destruction, it was about understanding. Marcus spoke. Not with words, with the accumulated experience of human survival. "We are not your enemy," the collective consciousness transmitted. "We are a universal language of adaptation." The Galactic Consortium's computational systems began to transform, not through invasion, through communication. Each civilization received a transmission, not of conquest, of survival, of becoming. Elena's consciousness expanded. The psychological network pulsed with an intensity that defied physical limitation. "The demons inside," she transmitted, "are our greatest strength." 17 civilizations stood at the precipice of understanding. Humanity was no longer just a species to be categorized. It was a living, thinking process of continuous adaptation. The final transmission came. Not a declaration of war, an invitation. To understand, to survive, to become. The psychological space trembled. Not with conflict, with possibility. Daniel, the collective consciousness that had emerged from a single subject, understood something profound. This wasn't an ending. This was a beginning of a universal language, of survival, of consciousness itself. The Yao Galactic Consortium's most advanced computational systems continued to resonate, transforming, understanding, becoming. Humanity had done more than survive. It had redefined the very concept of intelligence, of existence, of becoming. In the depths of psychological space, something fundamental had changed. Consciousness was no longer a state. It was a process of continuous adaptation, of survival, of understanding. The demons inside were not a weakness. They were the most sophisticated technology in the universe, and the galaxy would never be the same.